Hey everybody, welcome to the beautiful shores of Casco Bay, Maine. Behind me here, little map, chart of Cape Elizabeth. Here I am, back from sharing a few cocktails with my Etchells racing team for the summer. Very exciting to get out and touch grass a little bit in the midst of what's become a really challenging time for all of us. Uh, I think the tragic events of earlier this week are have weighed very, very heavily on my heart. And what is really weighing heavily on my heart is that there have been more events like this than there have been weeks in this year. Of course, I'm referring to the loss of life in Tennessee. One never really knows what leads a person to think it's at all reasonable or acceptable or a thing to do, really, to enter a public place, let alone a school, and randomly take lives that you know nothing about, that you've never encountered, that you're willing to snuff out for whatever reason. It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to me at all. Um, the fact that the person who did this has a is perhaps associated with people like me, people who have questioned their gender, etc., trans people. It really has no bearing on the the curious decision of an individual human being to take this sort of step as an action, as the exclamation point on their lives. You know, there have been over 2,800 people who've chosen to do this since 2018. Three of them have been trans, and well, there you go. We can find people from any number of communities. The vast majority of those 2,800 plus shooters have not been members of minority communities. The vast majority of those shooters shared one thing in common: firearms. Powerful firearms that have remained unregulated in many jurisdictions. Tennessee, for example, is one with the laxest regime of firearm regulation or registration or any sort of thing in the nation. People say guns don't kill people; people kill people. I realize that. I'm not a person who I'm not a person who calls for the abolition of gun ownership, but I am a person who believes that a gun owner needs to be as responsible as a car owner. That gun ownership requires a certain degree of responsibility. That they need to be registered, that they need to be regulated, that you need to pass a test, that you need to have, that you need to be instructed in how to store your firearm properly, how to clean your firearm properly, how to how to do stuff. You know, you want to have a firearm, please do. If it's for your own protection, if it's for the protection of your family, if it's for the protection of for whatever. If it's for sport, if it's for hunting. I live in a rural state. The state of Maine is we pride ourselves on the outdoors and hunting. I've hunted deer. I'm glad to do that. It's fun. And venison is good eating. But it's not the people. It is the people who do this, obviously. They're responsible. But a nation shouldn't be in a position where there are 200,000 more guns than there are citizens. Well, not 200,000. Pardon me. It's like we've got, for every American citizen, there are a bunch of firearms, and they're not. It's not like 300 million people all have a firearm. There are 900 million firearms for 300 million people. It's like, really? Do we really need that? So I was on a stream. I'm really the overarching thing. What I'm getting at here. I don't want to. I adamantly do not wish to link issues because I know that the right wing that are keen on talking a good game of keeping guns out of the hands of mentally ill people. And the mentally ill people du jour are people like me, apparently. I mean, let me see if I can pull this up. Oh dear. Donald Trump the Lesser, Don Jr., in his I don't know, must run in the family. A couple of nights ago, he decided that he'd say this about what happened 2 days ago. Given the incredible rise of trans, non-binary mass shooters in the past few years. Now, okay, so bear in mind, since 2018, there have been 2,800 plus shootings. Since 2018, there have been 3 trans people involved as shooters in those shootings. So incredible rise. Maybe not. By far the largest group committing as a percentage of population. Okay. 3 out of 2,800 plus. It's not a huge percentage as a percentage of population. And given the fact that trans people are like 0.2% of the population, and if the numbers were correct here, the 3 out of 2,800 plus is less than 0.1% of the population. Maybe Don might be wrong. Maybe rather than talking about guns, we should be talking about lunatics pushing their gender-affirming bullshit on our kids, question mark. You see the deflection here? Nobody's saying that there might be a problem with the way we raise our young men. I mean, let's call it 2,800. The 2,797 people who walked into a public place and did a mass murder thing, made people unalive. Nobody's talking about the culture around that surrounds that. Nobody's talking about the culture that surrounds gun ownership. Nobody's talking about the culture that could be created around responsible gun ownership. People are talking about this stuff as if it's war, and it's not war. It's responsibility. No other nation on the face of the planet has this problem. And no other nation on the face of the planet has this lax a regime when it comes to the regulation of firearms. Every nation on the face of this planet has a diverse population of people with a multitude of problems, physical, mental, etc. And yet we seem to refuse to address, we, the United States, our politicians, refuse to address that divergence. The data is clear. When there was an so-called assault weapons ban, and I have quibbles with that, what's an assault weapon, etc., and so forth. But let's just roughly say a weapon that can deliver multiple rounds of ammunition into a crowd at very, very short. We're not talking muskets here. We're talking rapid burst fire. We had a ban on weapons like that. And the data, when that ban was in place, both before and after, the ban was effective. And we won't look at that data and read what's true about it. So that to me is the situation. After every one of these incidents, this is what we talk about. But in this instance, we're talking about trans people too, because the shooter was apparently a transmasculine person. The full details of where they were, who they were, etc., I don't know. I don't think anybody knows at this point. I may be wrong. But within hours of the shooting and the release of the information that this person seemed to have a trans history, the New York Post put in at above the fold full headline: transgender person kills 6 in Tennessee. In that article, you had to read 7 paragraphs in to find out that at the time of publication, police said they'd found something to that effect. And had very, very few details. And you wouldn't have learned until 7 paragraphs in that the person they were talking about, who previously in the entire report was referred to as a feminine name using she, her pronouns, you would not have any idea that the person that they're talking about was assigned female at birth. So anybody reading that story, and this is a story that was published within hours of the event, anybody reading that story would have, as most people do when they read news stories, they don't read that far, would have walked away with the idea that the person who did this was a trans woman. Now, the New York Post, Rupert Murdoch, all of Murdoch's publications worldwide don't like trans women. In fact, they're very keen on saying over and over again and platforming people over and over again whose position is that trans women are dangerous, violent men. And this is where the intersection becomes problematic for me. Because it feeds into a whole bunch of rhetoric that we all have to, that we in the trans community are dealing with, both trans men and trans women. I mean, it's just so hard. But that's the narrative the right is promoting. And I refuse to buy into that narrative, and I really oppose the idea that anyone on any platform would, as well-intentioned as it might seem, say, well, the trans community is under attack, and the strain that they are under, that people like me are under, from the relentless assault of legislatures, of the press, of this, that, and the other thing, affects our mental health. It certainly does. It's very, very difficult to know that the society you live in hates you. Sure, it's going to affect your mental health. But to me, a lot of people in small communities are affected by misunderstanding of outright hostility that affects their mental health too. And some of them do snap. And, everybody can snap and people can snap in different ways. But God knows no one should use that kind of impact as a what can you expect? At some point somebody's going to snap and walk into a school and kill children and teachers and custodians and school principals. Or provide them the means. I mean, come on. Seriously? So I hope I'm not in this in talking about this stuff. I hope I'm not linking the trans community to the horrible thing that just happened, because it shouldn't be linked. As I said, far, there are a lot more people. There have been more incidents this year than there are weeks in this year of mass killings in a public setting. The questions of what to do about that have nothing to do with the simultaneous, relentless assault on the rights of trans people, to just live. The right wing wants to tie them together. I beg anyone who wishes to be an ally to not help them. We're your allies in the fight against a violent society. We simply want to live our lives in peace. We're asking you, I'm asking you, and I think most of my siblings would be asking you to help us all live our lives in peace. And that means working against the people that would stand in the way of that. Guess that's what I've got to say. I'm not going to call out. I mean, this was kind of spurred by a stream I was in late last night. Not as a on-screen participant, but in chat. And it was going down the road of, well, what can you expect? The trans community is under attack, and at some point somebody's going to snap. But I'm sorry. That's the rhetoric I hear from Matt Walsh and Matt Powell and whoever, the usual suspects. And please don't do that. Don't tie this don't tie this issue to my community. But please also do understand we are in deep distress. As it stands right now, over half over 50% of trans youth do not have access, will not have access, or may lose access, over 50%, to medical care that's essential for their well-being, according to best practices asserted by every major medical organization in the world. I was on another stream earlier where someone said, over the events of the past few days, well, this that of course there'll be a groundswell of, look at the bad trans, and there'll be transphobia directed at this, but soon it'll go back to normal. And I had to say, well, what's normal? Is normal 2020? Is normal 2015? Normal in 2015 was when North Carolina introduced a bill to restrict bathrooms to people, to bathroom access to people who people's assigned sex at birth, boys, girls. When you come out, blah blah blah, you're forever in one of two rooms. Normal then was the NCAA canceling championships, were businesses canceling conventions in North Carolina. A whole nation basically saying, this is ridiculous, this is preposterous. And that bill was repealed in 2015. In 2015 was 8 years ago. So is that normal? Or is the beginning of this year normal? Where there are over 200 such bills, and far worse, about public accommodation, about medical care for both adults and children, about access to all sorts of public spaces for trans people. What's normal? I mean, it's easy for cis people, I think, to just think that if we don't see it, if the pot's just bubbling and trans people are the only ones in it, that's okay. Me, I'd be happy to go back to 2015, but that's not normal anymore. What's normal is a relentless push to drive trans people, trans lives, out of sight and out of public life. That's normal. And you have normalized it. That's all I got.